In 2018, my family and I walked the Pacific Crest Trail from Canada to Mexico. Along the way, we met countless hikers who left lasting impressions. Today's guest, Dahn, showed up at exactly the right moment, offering perspective when we needed it most. While I took some creative liberties with Dahn's appearances in Pretty Good at Walking, available now on Amazon and Audible, his real story is even more fascinating than what made it into the book. I'm excited to share this conversation with you.
I'm really excited to be talking to Dahn today. Dahn factors very heavily in the book that I wrote, Pretty Good at Walking, available everywhere, Amazon, Audible, anywhere you go for books. Thank you, Dahn. So I can't say enough about how important Dahn was to our hike, both the Pacific Crest Trail and then forward from there. Turned into a real confidant and truly a friend. So I'm very, very excited to talk to Dahn, and we're testing my memory. I don't know if you tuned in the last time, but Bear Hair was on with us, and it proved that a good 20% of everything that I wrote about her attached to reality. So we're going to try again and see how we do in talking with Dahn about his hike. He did a very interesting hike in 2018, and maybe it was started in 2017. I don't really know. My memory's a little fuzzy, but I'm going to let Dahn tell you a little bit about who he is and a little bit about how we ended up running into each other.
Thank you, Vince. Great to see you after 6 years now. Is it maybe 7? Yeah, I'm Dahn. My trail name is Dahn. Never got one. Hopefully I pick one up. Need to hike a little bit more, I guess. I ran into the Strawbridges in 2018 on the PCT. We were kind of crossing paths, and I had heard about this awesome family doing this really epic adventure and didn't really believe it. I thought, maybe they were doing like a section and people had kind of expanded the rumor, but turns out that you folks were doing the real thing. And not only that, you were doing it with smiles, even through the hardships and the, the internal turmoil. So as far as being a confidant, I feel like I'm more of a cheerleader. I really love seeing your successes and sharing in your journeys. I'm really happy to be here. A little bit about myself. I like to walk too. It's been a passion for a long time, and it's led me to some really interesting places, internally and externally. In late 2017, I left my job. I was working in Tokyo, Japan. I was a geography teacher at an international school, and I sold everything I had, left my apartment, left my job, left my girlfriend at the time, and started hiking. I started in New Zealand, and I did the Te Aroa Trail, which traverses the North and South Island of New Zealand from top to bottom. And then, the goal was to just keep hiking in perpetual summers. Once that Southern Hemisphere summer ended, I moved up north, and that's when I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail the same year as Vince. And after that, I hiked in the Middle East. I did a linkage of trails combining the Jordan Trail, the Israel National Trail, and some off-trail travel to the pioneer trail called the Peace Trail, which I don't think anyone had done before, probably haven't done since, because I don't think it's the smartest idea right now, but really beautiful kind of connection of people, history, culture, and beautiful geography. And then after that, I hiked the Continental Divide Trail. And then after that, I went to Patagonia and did a bunch of random hikes and some mountaineering. Spent about 6 months in South America. And then COVID shut down a lot of travel, but I found myself in Canada and hiked the Great Divide Trail. And that was kind of the end of the continuous walking. Spans about 2.5 years and just short of 15,000 miles.
Did you set out with the intent of walking till you stopped? Did you have a mileage goal, a trail goal? Like, what was it like at the start, and then how did it morph into what it became?
It's a good question. I think to back up a little bit, I was really struggling in Tokyo. It's a beautiful place. The country is amazing. I highly encourage people who haven't visited or who have to go back and see it. But it was a very difficult place for me to live. I felt very much like a foreigner, and it was very hard to assimilate. for personal reasons, not no knock on Japan. And I think part of that was the work culture was very foreign to, my worldview. And I really cherished, things like free time and autonomy. That's kind of not expressed in Japan. So I guess a form of coping, or a coping mechanism that I used, was to daydream about what I would do if I didn't have to work, 70, 80 hours a week. And now that morphed into, daydreaming about it not being quite enough. Then I had to plan it to cope. And then at a certain point, it got to the point in my coping that I had already created this elaborate trip in my head and on paper. And all that was left to do was just say yes and commit to it. So I had this kind of bucket list, if you will, of places I wanted to see and things I wanted to do, and was able to just, execute on that and go.
Yeah, that's great.
See them all.
We were obviously, we're from Lakeland, Florida. And I remember a conversation with you where we discovered, or I rediscovered, I feel like I met you and then I met you and then I met you. But we talked about Lakeland, and you had spent some time there.
Yeah, that's also an interesting story that I probably didn't quite share with you. But Lakeland is a big part of how I got into long distance walking. If you'll allow me, I'll go on a bit of a digression here. But during my last year of college, I had my first sinus infection ever, and it turned into meningitis in my head, and I had to have pretty invasive surgery, and spent about 2 weeks in the emergency room, and had 12 weeks of intravenous antibiotics, and it had at-home nurse, and it really derailed my life path at the time. I was doing sports in college, and that was kind of my identity, and I couldn't really do that after this health scare. I had to have a follow-up operation to kind of remove the sinus. And after that invasive operation, the doctor said, no real physical exercise. You can't lift weights. You can't do any kind of strenuous activity. All you can do is walk. And I was like, okay, how much can I walk? I was always trying to push. And the doctor said, as much as you want. You can walk as much as you like. And I took him at his word, and would go on really long walks around my hometown. I was in northern New Jersey, and I would walk to New York City and back. And I'd walk, to other townships and even across the county line, just because that's all I was cleared to do. And it was a really nice kind of way of processing this unceremonious finish to what was once my identity. So it was a great way of unraveling my feelings, my thoughts, my emotions. And that felt like a very therapeutic way to spend my time. And after recovering somewhat, within a couple of months, I was actually offered a job on a dude ranch in Lakeland in Florida, which is called Circle F Dude Ranch. You probably know it. And I decided to go out there and try my luck at Florida a little bit. And the plan in the back of my head was at the end of the season, at the end of a camp, at the end of the working schedule, I would hop on the Appalachian Trail and walk home. So, that was my first kind of, and that's what I did essentially. After the summer, I hopped on the Appalachian Trail, my first, long distance hiking experience. It's fraught with a lot of mistakes and somewhat disastrous stories, as everyone's is. I had like a 67-pound pack when I started, and didn't even make it on the Appalachian Trail my first day. I slept on the approach trail, had like 10 days of food and way too much gear, but really, really cut my teeth on that trail and learned a lot about myself and about how much I enjoyed.
Was it your intent to go to Katahdin,
hiking.
or was it your intent to stop in New Jersey?
Yeah, I just wanted to walk home. I like the concept of walking home, kind of slowing down and being present in the moment. Actually got stopped by winter, just got really, really cold around late November, but had thoroughly picked up the bug. So wanted to complete the trail. That's great.
Yeah, well,
afterwards.
You didn't stay slow. I don't think. By the time we ran into you, you were walking big days, and you certainly lightened your pack. You were like frighteningly ultralight in some ways, if I recall.
Well, I think what's really interesting about the year that we did the PCT was, and in the fashion that I did, and I guess we can talk a little bit about that too. I had exactly 0 days of precipitation. I had no rain, no snow, had very mild conditions. It was a little cold towards the end as a southbounder, And I was in NorCal in October, finishing up a fire section that had closed. That was a little cold, but I had like astonishingly good weather.
Man, that's great.
The whole time.
Do you recall when we first, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do it this way? Can you give us the pattern of your Pacific Crest Trail hike? Because it was incredibly unique.
Yeah. When I set out for my 2-ish years of walking, I had some intentions that I set for myself. One of which was to spend some like deep time in introspection. I definitely like view myself as very social, but I knew that a lot of the growth that I was really hoping for would happen on my own. And I knew that, a traditional northbound hike would not allow for that. It would be a really fun experience, but I don't think it was what I was looking for out there. And I knew that southbound was also becoming quite popular. And there were a lot of people starting in the south as well, just because of all of the permit issues in the northbound kind of lottery system and how many people were choosing that option. So I decided to do a little bit of an unconventional hike. And I also wanted to maximize like weather, basically, which I think I did pretty well. So long story short, I started July 1st from Cascade Locks and walked north through Washington. And if I remember correctly, the Cascades that year were in the range of 200 or 300% of normal snowpack. So even in July, there was a lot of snow in the Cascades. But, July 1st in Harts Pass, it was low fees, high fees, snow, rain, sleet. I'm sure you experienced that when you started at Harts Pass and got to the border. I started with 80-degree weather and sunshine and just had that the whole way through Washington. So I was very happy with my choice there. The idea was then to hit the border, turn around, hitch to Seattle, and then take a bus to Portland and then a bus to Cascade Locks back to where I started. So finish up Washington north and then walk the rest of the trail south. Unfortunately, that didn't play out as well. I walked all of Oregon south without much problem, but 2018 was a pretty bad fire year. A lot of smoke on the PCT specifically, and a lot of fires popping up in NorCal. And one such fire closed down about 80 miles of trail just south of Dunsmuir, like in the Castle Crag area. And a lot of people didn't get to do that trail. But I had already been primed for this like flip action. So when that happened, I was actually like totally fine with it and rolled with it. Dunsmuir as a train station. I could take an Amtrak down to Bakersfield and take a bus to Tehachapi and be on the trail again, and just walk north towards the closure and hope that it opens up by the time I get there. What I didn't kind of calculate was that Tehachapi was still very much in the Mojave Desert area. And when I got there in August, it was about, it was like over 100 degrees and all the caches were gone, right? Because all the northbounders had already come through and the southbounders were at least a month away. So there was absolutely no water, and no signs of humanity, which was,
That's right,
in the defensive intentions. That's exactly what I was
a reason
looking for. But and it definitely made travel interesting. It definitely kind of shifted perspective and made me very alert and aware and also like mindful of the inherent danger of going out it alone and trying to do things the quote unquote hard way.
There? Did you have any short
through
water days?
Well, I mean, I'm an idiot. I left Tehachapi with like 2 or 3 liters of capacity, and
that's a climb
long
coming
stretches
out of Tehachapi
that were really hot. It was the hottest. Yeah. So I actually am very lucky and very fortunate and found a big gallon like Crystal Geyser plastic bottle in a wash. It was just someone's trash. Wasn't part of a cache or anything. It was just on a dirt road. And I put that in my pack and that gave me, 3.9 extra liters of capacity that I desperately needed. And that pretty much stayed full until I got to Kennedy Meadows. Every time I would hit, a water source, like even Spanish Creek or Uranium Springs, they were just trickling. They were hardly flowing. And I would spend, upwards of 45 minutes to an hour filling up, sometimes even more. It ended up being fine. And it just made me like really hyper conscious of natural water sources and making sure that I had enough buffer in terms of water, because most nights I was dry camping and most days I was doing, 35, 40, maybe even sometimes 45 miles to get to the next water source. and I didn't have the luxury of like breaking that up into 2 days, just because that's a lot of time
That
and a
sounds so
lot of
much
dehydration
more
going
like
on.
the stories that I hear, like from
So
Yogi or people that would have done it in the 90s. That would be my expectation, is that whatever you had in terms of a water report, it wouldn't be enough that you could take the risk. So you'd probably always carry 7 liters of water, and it would make for a much heavier trip and more uncertain.
yeah, definitely. The trail didn't have footprints on
Wow.
it. It just had animal tracks. I could see the mountain, the bear and the fox and the rabbit. It didn't have any footprints on it. So it definitely felt, I got that experience that I was looking for. It just happened to be by user
I think
error.
that is the way. I was going to wait till the end to ask you, but you said one of the efforts that you were making in setting out on this, and part of it was to be alone, was to do some work internally. And it sounds like you were already well invested in that by the time you were in Tehachapi going north, because you were so alone. Was that a pretty rich time in terms of your expectation? Did it match it?
Yeah, I did. Vince, it's interesting. It definitely, a hike is never what you set out to be, and all the great plans you have go out the window as soon as you take your first step. I mean, that's the cliche, right? I think I got all that I was looking for and more. I actually didn't get off trail from Tehachapi to South Lake Tahoe. I stayed on. I was able to do that through a variety of hiker boxes in the Sierra.
You never got off the resupply,
carry.
you just happened on hiker boxes that had stashes that were overflowing and just kept. That's a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was over 700 miles, and it took me about 3 weeks. And it's an antithesis to your point. When I got off, my family was very concerned because they hadn't heard from me in over 21 days. And actually, the day that I finally did get into service and got into town was the day that they had decided to start calling out to like search and rescue to look for me. So that was a huge wake up call that this like self exploration, this introspection that I was seeking was very selfish. And the epiphany there was that the people in your life that care about you do so, unconditionally,
without regard for your concern.
Like very, yeah, exactly. And to not, include them is kind of,
did
selfish.
That change
or
the way?
even arrogant
Did that change
act.
your trip going forward?
So that was, the first thing I did was I bought a satellite messenger. A satellite messenger is not for me. It's for my loved ones.
That's cool.
To make sure that they're worried. I think that's a really important. Yeah, I think it's a really important lesson in that safety is so much more not just about yourself, but about those that love you and those around you. I guess that's a good lesson to learn from spending a lot of time alone and outside. So all in all, like a pretty successful mission, albeit difficult physically and emotionally for me.
Well, I will say,
family.
I'm going to interject here with this. I deliberately got your story wrong in the book, but I did it with permission. I contacted you and said, do you mind if I use you as a device? Because I'm running into these moments when I'm trying to tell a story. One of the rules that I made for my universe was I have to tell it chronologically, and I have to stay within, so I'm staying within the trail, and I'm not bouncing out to past. I'm not doing long explanations about what the trail is. So almost whenever I needed a character, and I didn't have to fudge you that much, but almost whenever I needed this character who would ask good questions, I was like, oh, I need Dahn. He's going to show up right here. And I think I did it in a way that was believable. There was one that I obviously added there. Although I do feel like you came along at a moment when June really was impacted positively by our interaction. But I did add one extra interaction, as I recall. But I think in your northbound of Washington, we ran into you, and I think I moved you forward on trail a good way. I put you up near the border, and I don't know where we ran into each other. I think it was Stehekin, if I'm not mistaken, which means you were going a lot faster than we were. You're not taking your leisurely pace and taking it all in. If you started at Cascade Lock roughly the day that we started at Hart's Pass, we were 90 miles in, maybe 90 plus 20. We were 110 miles in, and you were 390, starting on the same day.
Well, there's no one to talk to, right? So you can, there's no need to stop and wait for others. You can.
That's right. They were.
Just go.
Yeah,
and
they
the days
sure
are
were.
long too, right? The sun was setting at.
And then I guess the next, tell me about that, because in the book I excused myself and blended you into the crowd by saying Henry says he's the one with, or somebody says he's the one with the beard, and I said, oh yeah, which one? Everybody's got a beard. So this is actually the first time I've seen your face, but when we met there, that was we were meeting lots and lots of people. We were pretty overwhelmed and we were pretty intimidated, and we certainly felt like we didn't belong, like we felt a little bit fraudulent there. But am I right in thinking it was Stehekin? We're going to go with your memory.
My
Whatever
memory,
your memory
this could
is, we're going with that.
I have a very clear memory, but I'm not sure it's the first time we met.
Okay.
In Skycomish, so Stevens Pass, I remember seeing you folks walking out of town and thinking, that's cool, there's a family out for a weekend. Not realizing that you were walking all the way down to Mexico with me.
I don't know how that could have been. It would have to be Skycomish.
No, we couldn't have met.
Yeah, and we were heading into whatever that
Pass,
section is, the not Goat Rocks Wilderness, whatever that next section is, and people were concerned for us because it's a long stretch, but that's fun.
Yeah, but as I mentioned to you earlier, I think time has an interesting way of flattening memories. It's the cliche for mountaineering is a good climber has a short-term memory. Yeah, and I think that's true for a hiker too. And I have a very short-term memory, and I just kind of look back blissfully on most of my escapades when in fact maybe there were some sufferfests in there that I choose to.
You timed that right.
In the beginning, I did. So definitely really bad mosquitoes in southern Washington. That was the first time I set up a tent. To eat lunch.
I remember it being bad.
Ever in my life. I think that happens wherever you are, wherever snow is melting, right? It's the first hatch. There's a lot of hungry mosquitoes, and it passed fairly quickly. And that's also the beauty of hiking alone is you don't have to stop unless you're tired. And if you're tired, you're going to sleep. So I was mostly moving and could kind of stay away from
I'm imagining this, and you can tell me I'm just like writing myself into your story, but it must have been nice to be passing all of the southbounders that were potential future compatriots and determining which ones you wanted to pass quickly, which ones you might want to walk with.
Well, it's interesting. That's a good thought. I don't think that was my strategy from the outset, but I think it's actually an unfortunate part of the way I did my hike because all moments were kind of fleeting with people, and I had to pass all the southbounders and all the northbounders.
Gosh, those were long days passing the northbounders for sure. Like you have the same conversation over and over again. Were you ever tempted to like a piece of paper, like just kind of like flashcards, and just have the same? Have your conversation written down before you had it?
That may have helped. Like instead of a hiker to town, it's just trail name, age.
That's great.
I would estimate that I passed 100 to 150 people a day for like 3 weeks in Oregon as the Northerners came through. That was like a lot of people fatigue there for sure. I don't know how you all fared, but I was definitely excited to get to the
so now that I know your actual like strategy that you did there, I know then that we ran into you in the Sierra when you were headed north from Tehachapi to South Lake Tahoe. We caught you in the middle there. We were walking with friends of ours who'd come out to hike with us for 4 days. So I could kind of place that moment almost exactly. I remember stopping for water and standing up and going around, and you were talking to the kids when I came around the corner, or maybe to Monica. But at any rate, I have a vivid memory of that one, of that interaction, and that's when we were gathering the Lakeland intel, in that moment. But your Sierra was pretty good because you beat the snow on that one perfectly. Yeah, you timed it perfectly, and you told us that everything was closing ahead of us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a big positive was that I didn't have to rush to get to amenities that were closing, like Muir Trail Ranch or the shuttle from Red's Meadow or any of those things, or VVR. And also I had all of the stockpiles of northbounders and John Muir Trail hikers who had just, dropped off all their excess food. So I was eating better than I would had I gone to a grocery store and done the whole price match thing, because there's lots of amazing food in these hiker boxes, and made a good reason to not get off trail.
How can you tell which is a stash that's going to be unclaimed? So what's the strategy? I feel like this is an important tactic for people hiking late season, to be able to identify when they pop up in a bear locker, which ones are the ones for them.
It's fair. And I know I've had my resupply pilfered before, and I saw that happen in Washington as well. To some climbers, so some peak baggers had stashed some food that was taken. I know the only bear locker that I actually used for a hiker box was in Red's Meadow, and that
so
was
you're actually
labeled
coming
as a
to
hiker box
Red's Meadow,
with free
and
food
there's
to
a
give
hiker
away.
box there, like a designated hiker boxes is what you're saying. What you're saying is you didn't have to get off trail to resupply. You were able to go into these places that had hiker boxes that you would take from. Oh, okay.
Right. Instead of going to Mammoth and spending the night, or getting off, going out of Kearsarge and going to Lone Pine, I just used hiker boxes along the trail. I mean, technically, Muir Trail Ranch is off trail, but I didn't get into a car.
But that felt weird.
Till South Lake Tahoe. Yeah, it did. It really did. It was a motorcycle. I got a hitchhike from this motorcycle.
Oh, that's
awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. Oh, shoot. So your Sierra was good timing again. You're saying, but when was your flip down? So you hit South Lake Tahoe and then came back down? Is that right? Okay.
So I kept going. I walked north on Dunsmuir, and actually about a week before I got to the closure, that 80-mile section of fire.
Wow. Was the trail itself damaged in that fire?
I was ecstatic. Obviously. No, the fire never reached the PCT. So, but it was very close. I know people who had walked right before the closure, or even the day of the closure, could see smoke, really thick smoke, and even embers in the actual fire. But it never touched the trail. Luckily, the trail through there is actually quite low, and a lot of it is through a valley, right by quite a big river, which I couldn't recall, but it's extremely lush and green. So obviously a lot of fuel, but also a good fire break and good prevention.
So when you hit Dunsmuir, did you find yourself hopeful of flipping back down and picking up with people? Were you kind of over the solo scene, or were you still whatever comes and I'm good with anything? How are you feeling at that point?
I don't think I had much of an opinion. I was happy to have finished NorCal. I think a lot of people doubted that I would be able to finish it just because of how late I was getting there. One thing I didn't mention is throughout all my hikes, I was actually tracking each day and each point of interest. My trails were used. A lot of the trail data that I collected was used in Guthook or Far Out guides. So every day I was tracking exactly where I was walking, and then taking pictures and writing comments about geolocated campsites and junctions and water sources, things of that nature. So, as I was relaying my forward progress to the Guthook people, they were kind of I don't know if you're going to make it. I was really proud of myself for I was proud of myself, but it was actually luck. I had beat winter because winter decided to show up later than it maybe normally would have, or I just, lucked out on timing. I got to Dunsmuir in mid-October. So it was quite cold in NorCal. We had some, low 20s, low 20-degree nights. Lassen was really cold. Hat Creek Rim Trail was extremely cold, frozen water, which is funny because everyone told me about that as being the hottest part of their hike, 100 no water. For me, it was probably the coldest part of my hike.
So we as you and your power banks and your tracking devices. You said we got to NorCal. Oh, I heard a we. I think it was a we. I just wondered what we became. Yeah. How did you?
Yeah, I think it was just me.
Because you're having to conserve power so that you can track all this stuff for Guthook at the time Far Out. So you can't be using you're not listening to music, you're not listening to books. You're just like walking probably 15 hours a day, and it's just you and your thoughts.
Yeah, I never had headphones on my hike. I've never listened to music or a book or a podcast because like, from a practical perspective for conserving power as much as possible. But also, I think it was a good forcing function to be present in my thoughts. I think a lot of people shy away from the concept of being bored, but that is a really good thing for us, and it's a thing that I think we're missing out on with the stimulants that we get from our phones. So I think removing that and like immersing a bit more was really helpful for me. From like a power consumption standpoint, I had my phone turned into like extreme low power mode, uninstalled all the apps, had only the tracker on, actually turned the screen into black and white gradient only to conserve power that way. And then just was really disciplined about keeping the screen off.
How many days could you go on a single phone
not
charge?
Using, usually it was about 1 day on a single charge.
Yeah.
And that's because tracking takes up a lot of battery. So about 40 miles is about a phone charge. I think batteries have come a long way since then. That was 7 years ago now, almost 8 years ago. I'm sure that the battery efficiency is much better now, but back in 2018, that's about what I was getting out of it. So I still made the whole trail with just a 1,000 milliamp battery.
That's amazing.
Pack.
So here's a question. I have this friend, and I'm going to get all this wrong because he's become an practicing Orthodox Christian. So he tries to tell me about it all the time and why I'm wrong, which I don't think he's allowed to do because I don't think they proselytize. So hopefully I get him in trouble. But he tries to always convert me to Orthodoxy. But one of the things he says that I find intriguing is that he says every day they practice, they contemplate death daily. But he says every day is like a lifetime. Like you approach it like it's a lifetime. Like in the morning is a birth and in the evening is a death, like that kind of vibe. And I wonder if with all the power off and with nothing going on, if it feels like that, like you've lived a lifetime in a day, or if it has swings like that, I just wonder what it's like to spend, because I haven't done it. I walk with my kids all day long, so I have conversations. That's like a death of its own. But like I walk with my kids all day long, and I have distraction most of the time, and I welcome distraction. I love listening to books on the trail, and I've done it without it, but I have my kids to distract me. So I just wonder what's that like, those days, like a day in the life of Dahn without anything. Does it feel like, what's it feel like? That's amazing. Days on end, like 21 days in a row. My gosh.
Well, that's a beautiful concept. I hadn't heard it before, and I'm definitely going to borrow it. I'll give you credit whenever I call it out. I had never considered it that way. I think in a lot of ways you enter a state of flow that continues past the flow state. And I know that sounds really weird, but when I felt the most present, it would last a week. And then I would look back and say, holy cow, it's been 7 days since I last checked in with my thoughts almost, because I was just feeling so comfortable and, in it, if you will. I don't know if I'm doing a good job of explaining that, but when things did feel really boring or like really monotonous, it was really easy to just look around because the PCT is insanely beautiful, and it's never truly that hard from a gradient perspective. It never approaches more than 10% gain or loss. So you're not really struggling physically that much compared to other trails. So you're really able to just move forward with that, that rhythm of one step at a time. And I think that cadence creates this continuous state of flow that even going to sleep and setting up your sleep situation, or even waking up and getting morning, is just a continuation of that flow state. And it lets time, it really warps time in a fascinating way. I think if you talk to people who lose contact with time, they'd probably tell you something similar. If you're on a ship or in solitary confinement, you don't have good ways of keeping up with time, and you lose track of time if you close your eyes and try to get 10 minutes right. You're generally really far off. I think that's probably what was going on there. and that's also by intention too. And when I hiked the Appalachian Trail, I actually didn't have a phone or a watch or any kind of technology at all. I had actually not even a map. I printed out a sheet of just the water sources along the Appalachian Trail. I used AWOL's guide back before the digital age and only had the back index that showed the water sources along the trail. And the time warp perception thing that I'm trying to allude to is really, really interesting. I think I've been kind of chasing that a little bit because it's very freeing in a way. You feel unencumbered and you don't have anything to distract you, so you have to just be present with yourself. And for a lot of people, that's super uncomfortable, and we shy away from it. I took a friend out camping once, and we got to our camp spot, at 6 p.m. and it was getting dark. And then he said, "Well, now we just have to lie here and be in our thoughts." Like, that sounds horrible. I don't ever want to do that. That's the, getting over that hump is the hard work, and after that, it's just an incredibly enjoyable experience.
On the way to that, for me, it was like, I don't think, like, it's really interesting. Like, you're pulling my thoughts forward, because I was going to say, what's it like to come out from that experience? Your experience was much deeper than mine. It sounds like, in terms of your removal into those rhythms. I can attach to some of the things you're saying. Like, I can remember feeling like waking up in the morning and breaking camp and getting walking felt like one continuous movement. Like, I can relate to that on a small scale, but it seems like your detachment was like, it seems like you were flirting with the edges of what people experience in solitary confinement. And so coming back into the rhythms of life that I wouldn't call them evil. They're just different, and significantly different, not just a little bit, like a long way different. Was that hard to do, to come back?
I think I came under interesting circumstances. COVID kind of shut down the world, and I had already been isolated for 2 years. So to me, it didn't feel like, from a social perspective, it didn't feel very hard. Plus, I think maybe you share this opinion too, but I felt like a longing for human interaction after spending time outside. I really relished and enjoyed talking to people, even if it was just a hitchhike or a passerby, or I feel like we actually dull that out over time. And I find myself impatient and not wanting to do, quote unquote, small talk. Whereas on a long trail, it's the highlight. It's that's what you're there for, is to meet people and talk to them and be present with them. So,
no, because
I know
when
I'm
you
kind of
come
jumping
back
around
and
here,
when
but
you engage with people after you've had that experience, you have this window of time where getting to talk about it is very enlivening and engaging, and you love getting to talk to people and hear about people and all that stuff. And then after a while, I feel like their eyes start to glaze over, and I can't tell if they're interested anymore. And oh boy, let's avoid Vince. He's just going to talk about that stupid hike that he did, But anyway, but I understand what you are saying. In some ways, your hike almost worked out that way as well, right? Like, you almost joined up. Isn't that about where you joined up with John again? Like, you finished up your northbound, flipped down, and then you get to run into to him. And then, but what a cool time, because you guys were fast and could stay together. I remember feeling like, that time that we stayed with you guys in the mayonnaise house, I can remember feeling like, man, those guys are so fast. Like, I always felt encumbered by my kids. I would always, every once in a while, sometimes I would feel like, man, I could go so much faster. I wonder how fast I could go. Maybe not I could go so much faster. Maybe it was just, I wonder if I could go faster, or I wonder how fast I could go. And then I ran into you two, and I was like, nope, I could not keep up with these guys. They are flying. So, but you ran into them, I guess, and you guys got to finish your southbound together. Is that right?
Yeah. That's a really good transition, Vince. Thank you for pulling us back in.
We should go there again. I don't care if anybody listens. We got to go back there. But anyway, for now, we'll finish the hike.
Yeah. So after flipping back to Tehachapi, I walked south with the intention of finishing the trail, and I had just hiked the LA Aqueduct and was just past Hikertown, sleeping on the dusty side of the trail, cowboy camping, waiting for sunrise. And at maybe 4 or 5 a.m., I heard someone coming up the trail and past me. And I found that really curious, because no one had really passed me on the PCT. Because Because I had been walking in such a non-traditional manner, so there was no one doing what I was doing. So that I was always in a different place. And B, because I knew that there was no one behind me for days. I was towards the back of the pack now because I had been walking north, and I knew that everyone was finishing ahead of me, and I was walking at such a pace that I didn't think anyone was within spitting distance of me behind me. But lo and behold, this person just walks by me while I'm sleeping, which I was like, what? I don't know who that was. So I hurriedly packed up my stuff in the dark and got to walking really fast. And I was like, was that an apparition? What just happened? And in the late morning, I came across John, who was just finishing up his really amazing hike. He started on the Mexico-California border and hiked the PCT north, and then turned around and was coming south. So it was doing a yo-yo, and he was just about to finish, and he had just made it through the Sierra, which was kind of the crux of that problem, if you will. And, was all but assured to finish, and was obviously very fit and moving very fast. So fast that he passed me, which was surprising because I wasn't used to having people anywhere in my aura, in my like, in my headspace even. So, I decided to see if I could walk as fast as this guy who was walking super fast. And I think we complemented each other really well. I could enter that state of flow and walk all day without stopping. I didn't need to stop for lunch. I figured out a system where I could just fill up water as I was moving and keep going. So I was really efficient at just moving. I wasn't necessarily very fast, not a very fast walker, but I can spend a lot of time on feet. And John, on the other hand, loves breaks and is really good at taking breaks for himself, but he's a very fast hiker. So he can move very fast, uphill, downhill, flat. So I think we complemented each other very well because we would push each other in ways that maybe we weren't as efficient. And we were able to cover a lot of ground with waning daylight, in November in the desert, and also some limitations. Like I was tracking this hike and had to take pictures of all these points of interest. So I had to be hiking during the day. I had to have light in order to capture, a junction or a campsite or a water source. So I made it into like a fun kind of like challenge every day. Like, let's see how far we can get before I have to stop, essentially. And it made for some really like efficient strategizing. Like, okay, if you can make it to this gate, well, you don't have anything to do for 3 miles after. So technically we only need to get to this gate before dark, and then we can walk for 3 more miles after that. So let's see if we can get to that gate before dark. And that's what made us fast hikers. Yeah. But really, I was just trying to keep up with him.
I had given you full credit for being such a minimalist that you were like eschewing even flashlights and tents and things like that. But the reality is you really were limited to daylight in terms of what you could do.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's a really good forcing function. I do love night hiking, and I do it very often. I actually went on a night hike with John last month, and it was super fun, and I love it. But to see everything on the PCT was a really important goal of mine. And I know sometimes night hiking you can get into this like mode or mood of like, let's just move, let's get there. I don't care what there is there. I don't want to see it. And it was really important for me to like not get to that mind space or like lose that immersion where I just needed to make forward progress, as opposed to like seeing what there is to see there. I think, this might not be a fair assessment, but I have two kind of like hard and fast rules for myself. If I don't have time to swim, I don't have time to hike. And if I'm walking at dark, I don't actually want to hike. I just want to get somewhere. So I probably don't need to be there.
You retain those too to this day?
And that's like,
are there moments where you'd break with that?
It's hard to be disciplined about it, but I think there are two good guiding principles, right? Like if you come across a water source that looks amazing to swim in, and you tell yourself, well, I don't have the time. You probably don't have time at all to be doing what you're doing, right? You probably scuffed it up somehow, especially on a long hike, right? Like when you have months. If you don't have time to swim on a month-long hike, you probably don't have time to hike.
That's great. Oh, that's great.
And you could expand that out to swimming. It doesn't have to be swimming. It could be like going into town and seeing something that you were interested in, or like a concert, or, I don't know,
Yeah,
something
you used a
that's
descriptor
not
forcing
forward
function.
progress
That's
on
a
the
good
trail.
forcing function too. I remember one time I drove back across the country with a friend from California to Florida, and we, leaving California, said, "Hey, we should jump in a body of water in every state." And I can remember jumping in one on the Utah border just because we had to jump in water, and it was like a irrigation canal or something. I think it might have been a cattle trough for all I know, but we got in the water. But it's kind of nice because it does force that, like it enforces that activity. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I like that. That's good. That's a good tip right there. Oh man. So, although part of me is resistant to the night one because there's something about walking at night that I just like, especially in the desert, under a big sky in the desert. You know, there's just something really special about being under the stars, and sometimes you really can't see, you know. So I might push back a little on the night part, but the water, I'm down completely. I'm sold.
I agree, and do a lot of night hiking in the desert, and that is, I think, especially under like a full moon or a nearly full moon, is a really special experience that I can't recommend enough.
Yeah,
so I agree with you, Vince, wholeheartedly.
Well, it was really fun. It was fun to be with you at both of the stops where we got to be with you at Hiker Haven, or Hiker Heaven it is, and with that Trail Angel in Wrightwood. Mostly because it was you were very kind, obviously very kind, but also pretty enamored with my kids. I remember the once it was because of their knowledge of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or their appreciation for that movie, and then the other was for their understanding of geography. Although I didn't know that we were competing out of country with Koreans for our knowledge, so maybe it wasn't as impressive as I thought originally.
No, I thought it was just awesome to see a family do something like you did together, obviously, but also that you were still, the trail teaches you a lot, right? That's the cliche, but you were also teaching a lot to your kids, both from, you know, good culture, like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and like, you know, academically from their knowledge of geography, but also just like life lessons, you know, things that don't just occur. They don't appear in a vacuum. So yeah, it gave me a lot of respect and admiration to be around you folks. So it was always a pleasure to come across you on the trail or to spend time with you on or off trail. And I do apologize that the Trail Angel experience maybe wasn't what I had anticipated, but it was, nonetheless a really good excuse to spend time with you.
And I was, I kept going back and forth about how to write that whole thing. And ultimately I was like, this story is a quest story. You know, of course it's a quest. You have to write it like a quest. And then I thought how funny it would be to have that Trail Angel be kind of the siren, but not a very effective siren. You know, like why don't we all stay and keep doing this? You don't have to keep going. But the appeal was very, very, very minimized at that point. So he didn't have a lot to offer to attract us away from the mission when I was writing it. I just thought this is really a fun little device that showed up without my intention. And, so that was fun. I was mostly trying to write it as truly as I could, and then I would find all these little things in it that were kind of fun to do. But there were very few people I turned them into a literary device, but you were one, and I'm grateful that you let me.
Well, it was such a pleasure to read the book. And if people who are watching this haven't read it, I won't spoil what happens at the end, but they do a lot of walking. I won't tell you if they finish. You got to read it for yourself to find out.
That's great.
But
well, what's fun is we didn't only walk with you on that trail, but because of your participation with Far Out and in logging all of that and recording all that for them, those routes, we walked with you on the CDT as well. In fact, anytime we'd get off trail and Henry would swear, like he would be he would just be zoomed way out, but he would think he was on the red line and he'd be like, why did Don miss the trail here? Like, talking about you all day long. And you told me that at some point I was so miserable for you thinking about it, especially on the CDT, because what a awful thing to have to do. Like you said, you ended up on a plateau or a mesa or something and off trail and had to try to get back to trail, and you had to dive off and you were worried that the gully that you'd taken would cliff out and you had to get back to trail. And then it dawned on me, and then you had to go back and connect your steps because you have to record the route. And I was just so miserable for you. Like, no wonder that was an awful trail. And you did such incredible miles on that. But we talked about, you went that whole trail with us, and oh my gosh, like this is So this is my tip. Don's given the best 2 tips of all, the tips about whether or not you should be hiking, but I'm going to take his from him, but the umbrellas were incredible. I will never hike without an umbrella again. So every time we were standing in the trees in a hailstorm and just hearing him just shred the top of our umbrellas, we're like, thank you, Don. So your name was uttered over and over and over again on that. And your your itinerary was helpful too. It's just that we couldn't quite keep your itinerary. As I recall, we had to change a little bit the way that we did that.
It was such a pleasure to be a part of your hike and live vicariously through you on the CDT and beyond. I mean, it's amazing what y'all have accomplished. Seriously,
I'm gonna go to the Middle East. When you went and hiked when you created the Peace Trail, did you record that with Far Out as well?
I did, yeah. And I split them up into their national scenic trails, their respective national scenic trails. So the Jordan Trail and the Israel National Trail. And then I also I created an off-trail kind of cross-country section to connect them. And then also followed a trail in the northern part of Israel to link back up to within less than a mile of where I started in Jordan. So it's nearly a perfect 1,200.
So one of the things that I think is the most amazing, I'm going to get us both in trouble here. Well, you can stay on the conventional side of this, but the trace of former inhabitants is about the most interesting part of those experiences for me. Walking on the southern end of the Continental Divide Trail, when you walk into that Mogollon country and you see handprints on the wall and animal paintings on the wall from 800 years ago and granaries and all those things, is really amazing to me. Like, I love this sort of. And even the PCT, how it follows those old mining routes that were old supply routes. And it's just really neat to get to discover that you're walking in footsteps of people long before. But then you start doing the math and you realize when the Mogollon were putting their granary together, there were schools in England that were built of stone that still exist to this day and are still schools. It's incredible how old some of the things are once you go that direction. I cannot imagine what it was like on the Jordan and the Israel Trail. Did you discover like ancient pathway? Like, did you know of and see evidence of ancient pathways and story and get him?
Yeah, definitely. I share that love too from my background in geography. That's the human geography part. The Jordan Trail specifically really makes a point of following old trade routes and be linking up ancient sites. So a lot of the trail passes by these, ancient Roman, ancient Arab, architectural marvels that some of which are still in use today. And the Israel National Trail also makes a point, goes out of its way even to go to these historical sites and prehistorical sites as well. There's a really cool resource in Israel specifically. It's a map layer called Amud Anan, which means pillar to the sky. And it's literally a map overlaid with ancient areas that have been discovered. So burial sites and temples and Roman, aqueducts and things that are like just non-contemporary, essentially. A lot of those happen to overlap on purpose with the path that you take. So you're walking through these arches, or you're walking in these prehistoric inhabited caves. It's such a rich, really amazing journey through space and time. That's the cliche that you always hear in like a movie trailer, but it's really what was happening. And you don't have enough time for even one day's worth of exploring. Like if you spent only one hiking day exploring all of the ancient sites that you're walking through, it would be a lifetime of archaeology and linguistics and Egyptology and all these other things, theology as well. So yeah, it's like an overwhelming.
And that
amount
one,
almost.
I would think that one more than any of them. Like New Zealand's pretty. The European presence there is pretty new, and I'm not sure about the Maori. I didn't see a lot of evidence of that. I don't think they left as much evidence, but it seems like once you get into the Middle East, it would be incredible how much there would be. But
yeah, and it's a lot of desert too, right? So it preserves really well, so you can get these like really, really great.
That's
old
cool.
artifacts.
Well,
that stick around.
So I guess I have to ask. I guess I want to ask this, but then I was going to propose something afterward for your next walking adventure with Far Out or whoever their competitor might be. But we were on Backpacker Radio and got talking to Chance, and she's gotten really enamored with the history of the Appalachian Trail. And I kept thinking for my kids, like, this would make homeschooling easy if they could just open Far Out and they could tap on a waypoint and it would say, turn toward the east. This is battlefield thus and such. So-and-so came over the eastern rise that you see off to the left. And we just really replay and recount all of these historical moments and place them right inside that. And I can't imagine what could be cooler for these people who are essentially pilgrims and walking in the way of people who've walked before to get to discover that all along the way. I think that's the next level up for any distance hike trail guide.
I totally agree. And there's so much that I feel like I miss out on. Like in the PCT, for instance, you walk by this thing that you don't even realize what it is. And you only find out after, oh, this peak was named after such and such because he was the first white guy that saw it, whatever. But there's all that context in every step that you take that I feel like would enrich a hike so much more.
Like you end up
if we took the time to discover it.
3 miles up a smooth grade before you discover it's an old rail grade. And you've been walking it for, you've been walking it for an hour before you realize, wait a minute. Somebody, like this, I always think, like, somebody sat with their little steel lunchbox, popped it open when they were building a railroad here, or up here, logging forest or running mules across to a mining camp or something. But there's so much story that's out there that'd be really fun for people to get to access. So, but that's going to lead me to my next question, which is, and I really would love to ask you about this, because so much of my identity, I'll tell it this way. My left side is more achy than it's ever been. It's probably a resultant of being 52, but my ankle hurts a little bit. My knee hurts a little bit. My hip hurts a little bit. And I can tell that it's not, this is not a thing that's going to, right itself anytime soon. So I'm a little nervous about trying to keep up with Georgie this summer. It's going to be a problem. But so much of my identity, because so much of what I did in my life that I loved, is tied in with this ability to walk and this joy of walking that I discovered. Monica always knew it was there, but I found it by way of her and my family and all that. And so I wanted to ask you, because there was a time, not in the not too distant past, when you hurt your foot and you were limited in your walking, and you had done so much that this sort of was able to set you in a state of flow, as you say, and this was the access to it. And then that was taken away. And I can't imagine, with as much of my identity is wrapped up in it, you had gone deeper down this rabbit hole, and to have experienced that. I'd love to know what that was like for you to try to grapple with. Or you could tell me to go away. But I just would be interested how that was and how you dealt with it.
Yeah. Fair question, Vince. I think one thing I would say is, after a certain amount of time and distance, you have diminishing returns on what you get out of anything, whether it's a long hike, whether it's writing a book, whether it's progressing in your career. And I think I definitely felt that bell curve start to arc in terms of diminishing returns. Maybe I was focusing a lot on the size of the trip or the grandeur of it, but it definitely felt like I was getting less and less out of each hike over the last couple of years. So I did hurt myself. I was learning to ski at the right age of 31, probably a recipe for disaster, but hurt my ankle, and it was a long road to recovery, and I'm still on that road, which limits like the volume that I can put on my body. So I've definitely looked more at micro adventures and pushing myself in other ways, and actually figuring out how to get that state of flow from a quality perspective versus a quantity, which I think would have happened anyway. Being more sedentary, having a partner and dogs and a home and a job and rent, etc. So I think it's a natural progression of, you have to find your state of flow somehow, because it's not going to be by taking 5 months off.
In some way, it almost sounds like you're saying that
to find it
at a good time, because it pumped the brakes on something that you might have pursued and would not have given you the same reward. Is that an accurate?
Yeah. And definitely. And it also made me kind of open my aperture and look beyond.
Where has that led? So where has that led?
I've been getting into. Yeah. I've gotten really into bike packing recently. I just bought a gravel bike and put a bunch of gear on it and been taking it on some really cool adventures. I've been doing more like trail running and doing like harder, bigger efforts that are shorter in duration.
Okay.
I've also been doing a lot of glamping, like going out for 3 miles. Last weekend, John and I actually went out for 3 miles in, camped with a huge 4-person tent and, had a really nice dinner and walked out 3 miles. And that filled my cup just as much as any day on the PCT. So just, the irony is beauty is where beauty is where you find it and where you look for it. It's not necessarily waiting for you.
That's cool. All right. What do you have? What do you have? What are you thinking about? What am I missing?
I want to know what the next book is, Vince. You only wrote about one of your trails, but you folks have clicked a bunch of trails and a bunch of miles that are not the PCT. So what's next for the Strawbridge clan?
So I wrote in 2008, I was a home builder. I was supervising the construction of homes, and then the writing was on the wall that this thing was going bad. And so I called my grandfather and I said, "Hey, you have a contractor's license. Can I build some houses on it?" So I did some credit borrow and build, because all that California money was coming into Florida. And so we were building speculative homes. And then right in the middle of it, it all just, they tightened up the money. The banks tightened up the money, and the people that I had sold the homes to couldn't get qualified. So I had seven speculative projects in the ground that had end users, but that were no longer qualified. So I just lost everything. And so instead of doing what, a heroic person would do and buckling down and figuring a way out of the hole, I sat down and wrote about it. I wrote about how horrible a hole I was in rather than try to dig myself out. And the way that I wrote it was I told the story narratively, and in between this story, I would call it parenthetically, this sort of observation, not necessarily connected, but it was observation. And so I picked that up recently, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is a fun book, and it's better. Like, it's good. Like, it's a little self-indulgent, but it's good. And it's sort of the prequel to Pretty Good at Walking. If you want to know what makes a guy leave his life behind and take his family on a hike, it just sucks this bad. Like, this is what was going on, and this is why, right? And so for me, it was fun to pick up and reread. And I thought, if I tighten this up and I rework this, I think I can actually release that. But what's fun about it is that I think the same style that I used in that one, I can use to tell the stories of these hikes, assuming that they're worth telling. But Pretty Good at Walking, as you know, is a very straightforward story of our hike. And it was an effort to discover what happened by just telling what happened, what changed, and what it meant by just telling what happened. And I think it did that. I feel really comfortable about the discoveries that I made there in the context of writing that. This prequel is nice. I have it. I'm going to throw it out there. But then if I write the Continental Divide Trail, what I'd love to write, the way I'd love to write it, is I would like to tie it into those histories like we were talking about, where essentially, because there are these conflicts. It really is a story of conflict and confusion. And the nice thing is that ties into what the Continental Divide Trail is as well. The Continental Divide Trail is, the choose your own trail. Even if Don gave you a red line path to follow, it doesn't mean that's the only option. So there's all these options. And our hike took place during COVID. And there were good people very vehemently on either side of that question about what we should do and how we should deal with it. And you walk through westward expansion. And, regardless of how you tell history, there are good people on both sides of that question. There are Europeans who view a way of interrelating to the land as one thing, and there are Indians who view it, there are American native Indians that see it in another way. And both are competing there are competing worldviews that don't find a way to compatibility. So, for example, the easiest example probably is that a European cuts straight rows and plants food and creates abundance and sees that as the mission. And then the indigenous people of America were trying to glean from the land. And neither are wrong, but they are not compatible, and they never were going to be compatible. And so for me, like, the idea of trying to interweave the story of walking through this land with the stories that were already there would be really intriguing to try to do it well. Because you pass right above Blue Hole, which is this terrible massacre of Nez Perce Indians, and you're a quarter mile off trail. I spent the night in a Mogollon cave, and it was as near as I've ever had to an experience where I thought, I know what happened in this cave. Like, I feel what happened in this cave. It was so weird, So I would write it that way. And then if I were to write the Appalachian Trail book, thankfully no one's still listening, so I'm going to go ahead and say, so the title of the CDT book would be Which Way Do We Go? Which I think is indicative of, and the title of the Appalachian Trail would be Leave a Trace, for a lot of obvious reasons, not least that it would really offend a lot of people. But I also think that the fingerprint that you leave on this planet is the significant thing, right? I leave it through my kids. I leave it through my stories. And I would tell that story. Nobody wants to hear about my family story. Like, guess what happened? We went to the trail. We didn't think we could do it. It sucked for 3 weeks, and then it got better. And then we fought a little bit, and then we made it, right? It's always the same. It's the same trail every time. But on the Appalachian Trail, we were so impacted by people and personalities. And there's so many people on that trail, like, that even though it interweaves with some histories, I feel like the histories on the westward expansion are more confusing and more interesting to try to understand. But the Appalachian Trail is just so filled with these personalities, and I would write it that way. So I say I would. I mean, like, first of all, we have to sell a ton of these Pretty Good at Walking. So if you're listening, buy the book so that we can write the other books, because I think they're worthy efforts. And I don't just think they're worthy efforts in the sense that it tells my family story. I think these are everybody's stories. Like, when you read this story, you find yourself in these people. Like, you might even, if you're a genuine and a kind person that's interested in other people, you'll find yourself in Dahn, if I wrote him well. If you're a person that gives up 80 to 90% up the hill, you find yourself in June. It was fun to write. It was fun to write, and I'd love to keep writing it. But that's my long answer to your short question.
I want to read those books.
So how
my
well,
interest
like,
greatly.
when you read the book, and you were involved in early interactions with it and were helpful to me with some of your observations. How well you're a hard one to capture, because you genuinely are interested outward. Like, you don't necessarily get all of Dahn when you ask questions. It's hard to get you to talk about yourself. But did you find yourself in that person that I wrote about, in the way you talked or whatever?
Well, selfishly, I was very excited whenever I came up, because I wanted to see how you perceived. So it was like looking at a photograph of people. You always look for yourself, right? That's the ego part. But I also was, intrigued by how I was perceived by the Strawbridges and what impact I had on people's lives. I think that's important for everyone. You talked about the fingerprint, what you leave behind. I think that's the greatest compliment you could ever get, is to be featured in a book in some capacity. Hopefully it's well, but yeah, I think you did. You may have embellished my ability to coax June up a hill, but I'm really happy to have shared moments and miles on this trail with you, and to have made an impact on someone's life. That's the greatest compliment one can receive.
It wasn't hard to make up. That's not an embellished element. You definitely were an impact on that hike, and then subsequently. I mean, we really appreciate all the time that you took to help us and coach us through that next trail, because we were intimidated by the CDT, and we were alone. Like, we kind of had a nearly, other than being with each other, we had a more like your experience. There wasn't a lot of people out there, not in COVID. So. All right. So tell us, this is what I'd love to know. What are you up to these days? Actually, so this is back to an original question. Before we even started recording, one of the things that I said, what I said to you was, it was so easy for my kids. It's so easy in the story of my kids to see them come home and then begin to do life with this trail that serves as a foundation and in some way just analogous to the future. So June will say, I can keep mucking this stall till 3:00 because I had to climb up Deception Pass, and I didn't think I could make it, and I made it. So it's got all these corollaries to their life, and they're a little annoyed with me at the significance that it continues to play in my life. They're just like, yeah, we've moved on to the thing that it is analogous to, Dad, you know? And so we talked about that a little bit beforehand, but I would love to know, I guess maybe, like, what did this experience, how did it lead to what you're doing now, and what are you doing now, and where do you see yourself going? I don't know. It's probably too, like, I think we're probably getting too weird, but anyway,
Well,
I'm interested in it, so I'm asking it.
the PCT specifically has led me to precisely where I am in my life, and I'll tell you how. After the CDT, I did a trip with John that he organized called Lowest to Highest, which starts in Badwater Basin in Death Valley and goes up to Mount Whitney. And this is about the person who just passed behind here. I met my current girlfriend and the person I
Cool.
spend the most time with on that trip. So had it not been for the PCT, I wouldn't be here in the little town called Ojai, and I wouldn't be with Christina, my partner, and I wouldn't be with the two dogs that we share and cohabitate with. So all roads have led here in a way. In terms of the other part of your question, though, I think that we talked a little bit about how, you know, elective suffering, hiking a long way and being cold and miserable and uncomfortable and physically hard and being fatigued helps put things into perspective that may seem hard in other parts of our lives. But as I drift away from that elective suffering, I find that, like, I do truly seek that stasis. I want to be comfortable. I want to sleep in bed and eat the good food and cuddle with my dogs. And I see that, like, removed from it for a couple of years, I'm okay with that. I don't need to challenge myself and be miserable and suffer and prove to myself that I'm tough or prove that I'm fit. I actually really enjoy going for a dog walk for 3 miles or 4 miles, and that's my exercise for the day. So yeah, I think it's like it's such an invaluable lesson. And it's such an invaluable life experience, but it's not one that you need to draw on all the time.
No, I think
I know it might be an unpopular opinion, but in moments that feel hard, though, it is really easy to draw on, you know. So I didn't mention, but I every summer I guide for 3 or 4 weeks. I usually do off-trail backcountry trip, usually a high route, and usually in the Sierra. And a lot of the clients I take out have never done that, and they inevitably go through moments that feel really hard for them for a variety of reasons in a variety of situations. And the constant feedback I get at the end of a trip is, I really like Don as a guide, but he has a hard time, like, showing when something is tough. Like, he always had a smile on and he never was just like, this sucks.
Yeah.
Because it never does for me. Like, I think I have such a well of experience, and I feel like you probably do too, Vince, that, you know, whatever predicament you might currently be in is not nearly as bad as something you've experienced in the past. It's surely not dissimilar from something you've experienced in the past, especially if it's an outdoor setting. So it feels very, you know, it feels manageable. It feels like something that you can deal with and something that you can overcome.
Do you think it makes you, like, is it good to look backward into their suffering? To remember, like, you're kind of like, oh yeah, I remember when I used to feel that way. That's, you're taking or guiding these people. I could always, like, I remember I was a river guide one summer in Northern California, and we would stop about halfway down the river, and there were these cliff jumps, and we'd jump from 15 feet, and then the guides would sneak up to about 60 feet, and we'd all three jump together. One would do a dive, one would do a gainer, and I would just jump because I couldn't do any of this. But we would jump, and then we'd swim over, and then we'd encourage these kids off of a 15-foot jump, and they would be proud of themselves for doing it. But I remember standing next to this one girl who was terrified to go. And I thought, man, you don't know what a gift this is to be so terrified at 15 feet, because you're going to get all the joy and all the rush that I get from 70 or 75 feet, and you don't even put yourself at risk. I can remember feeling that And I thought, this is so funny because in some ways it's like that when you take people who are underexposed or unexposed and you sit there and you watch them, you almost get to relive your own experience without any of the risk or without any of the level of suffering. You just kind of get to relive it.
Yeah. And that answers your first questions. Like, what am I doing? Well, I'm taking people out and experiencing this like unbridled joy through them. And I gain a lot of satisfaction from that. So I really like having a friend come out to visit, and we do a short overnighter in my backyard, and I get to show them the beauty of Los Padres National Forest, which
one of the things I would love
part of the PCT
do, and I don't
too.
know if it would work into your schedule, but I talked to John about it briefly, and I haven't followed up because I think it's going to be cheaper to fly somewhere else. But we're going to be in the Alps too early, potentially. We're going to start in May on the Hexatrek and walk about 500 kilometers and then flip down to section 4 and come up and then go up into the Alps. But if they end up with some late snow and whatever, we might be using crampons and ice axes, which we've prepared for but never had to do. And so I was like, Georgie, maybe we should try to take a trip out to California and get some training. We'll get Don and Airborne to take us out there and show us how to use the gear.
I can't think of a better teacher than Airborne. I mean, that's how he got his name,
line.
Right?
My goodness. I forgot to ask him. I forgot to ask him to tell that story when he was on, but I guess so, yeah. Oh,
you
man.
gotta have him on again.
Now, you've resisted a bunch of trail names, I'm sure. Give me, maybe this would be a good way to sort of tie it all up. Give me the ones you were most inclined to take, the one you were most inclined to take, and the one you were least inclined to take, because surely people have tried.
I don't remember too many trail names. I've been called Minuteman. I've been called Don Wall. I've been called.
That's pretty good. I mean,
I don't actually remember any other
ones. Were you at all
but
tempted by anything?
I think the beauty of it is I was usually alone. So whenever I walked far enough away, the name would just not stick.
When we were on, when we were on the AT, we were about, I don't know, few hundred miles in or something. We're still kind of in the bubble and we hadn't gotten away from them yet. And I sent Henry off trail to check out a shelter to see if there was room around the shelter for us to set up tents and stuff. And he went down and he came back up and he's shaking his head and kind of gruff. And I was like, what's wrong, Henry? He's like, oh, those people try to give me a trail name. And I was like, what? Are you kidding me? He's like, yeah. I went down there and they were like, hey, what's your trail name? And I said, I don't have one. And they said, well, what's that in your pocket? And he's like, it's Milk Duds. Oh, we'll call you Milk Duds then. And Henry said, I did not walk 6,000 miles to be called Milk Duds. I know, that's right.
It's almost like a fitting trail name at that point, though. That is an awesome Henry story.
Yeah, he's
so
consistent, if nothing else. What were you about to say, though, about your trail name?
I also think this might be like overly pious, but I think that a lot of people like trail names because it gives them a level of anonymity, or it allows them to vent themselves. And I really wanted to be like comfortable in my own skin and to be exactly who I was and not hide or shelter or, be vulnerable in that way, I guess. And yeah, like not change myself for the trail and just actually be Don on trail, off trail, through trail.
This was a grand introspective quest in some way, as you describe it. Can you lift the lid just a little and say, this is what I was looking for and this is what I found?
I think I was looking to have fun. I was looking to do something that I could be proud of. What I found was, all the epiphanies were
simpler
really
than you expected.
Common sense.
What was your sport? What was your sport that you were involved in college? Okay. You know what? I know that now that you said it.
In college.
I remember that. That's funny. Okay.
Yeah, I was a jumper. I did triple jump and long jump.
This is like a repetitive theme too. Like you're into something and then it's taken away, and then you're into something and it's taken away. You don't want to have to keep. That's not something you necessarily want to have to keep being good at. Oh, that's great, man. Don, thank you so much for talking to me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on, and it was great to catch up with you, Vince. It's always a pleasure to be in the Strawbridge gravitational pull. You guys
if you're ever tempted to, escape, if you want to reach escape velocity or whatever, just let me know. But in the meantime, we'll keep bugging you. That's for sure. All right.
Please do. And good luck. And everyone who's still watching, please go read this book. It's excellent. Take care.
What started as Don's quest for solitude in 2018 turned into nearly 3 years and 15,000 miles of continuous hiking across some of the world's most beautiful trails. His PCT journey alone, starting northbound from Cascade Locks, then flipping south through Oregon and California, taught him that even in our most solitary moments, we're still connected to those who care about us. And thanks for listening. And remember, you can find Pretty Good at Walking on Amazon and Audible. See you on the trail.